Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. Today we have author Malissa Smith, who wrote this beautiful book, Promise of Women's Boxing, New Era in the Sweet Science. And Melissa and I have been going back and forth to kind of get her up here. And, I want to thank Maureen Shea for putting us together. And I really, really appreciate it because I know you're coming out of a long way to get up here. And I appreciate you getting here. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I also really thank Maureen for connecting us, and I'm really happy for this opportunity.
Yeah,
Plus it's a day out of the city.
It's a day out of the city. Yeah, you get to come to the country and talk about boxing. I mean, man, we got a good day going on, right?
Exactly.
Beautiful weather and everything else like that. So let's dive right into this. I mean, you and I have been talking offset here about a lot of different things, and kind of like, why don't you walk our people through the dynamic of you in boxing and what kind of led you to this?
Doing this.
And I'm honestly like, look, and boxing touches all of us in a different way. We all have our reasons why, we're in the sport, what drives us to the sport. How we get there, what we want to be part of. And I can't really wait to get home and dive into this. I've read some excerpts online and everything, but why don't you kind of tell us
Sure.
What brought you into this game?
Well, I always loved boxing. Kind of my first love was professional wrestling, with Bruno Sammartino, guys like that.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
And then from there, I easily segued to watching boxing, and I was intrigued with the science. I love the idea of the science of boxing. The fact that it's so precise, so technical. And, I grew up on a rough street in the Lower East Side on 12th Street, and there were Italian gangs and Puerto Rican gangs, and periodically they'd rumble on the streets or something would happen. And you always knew the kid who had been taking boxing lessons at the boys' club because they were the ones that kept their elbows in tight, ducked out of the way, never really got hurt. And the kids who were winging from, first base all the way out, those are the ones that ended up on the ground. And I was like, no, I want to be like the fighter who can duck out of the way and has that science. So I was about 12 years old. I had an uncle that taught my brother and I the old 1-2, and I was so proud that I could turn a jab. It was the coolest thing in the world. And, started to watch boxing as I liked sports. I liked baseball. I was a big Mets fan. But boxing and watching it on Wide World of Sports, which was pretty much the only time you could really see it.
It's all we had, in those days,
Yeah, and it had Howard Cosell. And then was very intrigued by Muhammad Ali as a cultural figure. Growing up in the late 60s, being a teenager in the late 60s and becoming an adult in the early 70s, Muhammad Ali was this huge figure. And it kind of drew you into the sport aside from all of the other aspects of his life. I mean, here's a guy who would show up on Johnny Carson's show,
He was a magnetic personality, and I've talked about this with other people.
Yeah.
His worth today, if he was alive in the sports world, would be phenomenal because of he was, an icon before the Michael Jordans and Jeters and Tiger Woods because he was able to relate to the people. As a fighter, he was the best, and he had personality.
He did, and he could be soft spoken. I mean, he could. The interesting thing about him is that he learned very early on that he was a performer in a show, and he actually had very good advice from the wrestler Curious George, who had these beautiful blonde locks that he would coif, and he came out in a big robe, which parenthetically James Brown adopted as well in terms of performance. So Muhammad Ali understood very, very early on in his career that if he was going to make it as a fighter, and if he was going to cross over into popular culture, which he did, he had to have an angle. And his angle was his rhyming poetry, was being outrageous, was calling when he was going to win a fight and by what means. And since he was right, a fair enough percentage of the time, it caught the imagination. So he was really able to cross over, but he was also boxing at a time of enormous change in the United States.
Right.
The civil rights era, he was able to link onto that and become very important as a figure of what blackness came to mean.
Right.
So growing up, as I said, and coming into my young adulthood, he was a very important figure. And I hooked onto it from the standpoint of the boxing as well. It got me intrigued. And then I used to love to watch boxing, whether it was amateurs, professional, and then watching him fight, but also liking the other heavyweights. I think, in terms of fighters, I loved Kenny Norton. So following his career and then pushing that out when the era of the heavyweights seemed to fall away, getting into the welterweights, getting into fighters like Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvelous Marvin Hagler and so on. So I just stayed with it, but always had an interest for myself. It's like, well, God, I could still turn that jab. When am I going to ever do that? How do I do that? And then somewhere late 80s, early 90s, I was like, yeah, I can do this. And then at some point, I walked into Gleason's gym. I'd actually had shoulder surgery, and as part of the rehab, I took a little boxing class at a local gym and then said, well, that's not enough.
You got to walk into the Mecca.
Went into the Mecca, Gleason's gym, and began my own journey in boxing, learning the sweet science for myself, and realized that out of that, I was learning my own personal power, which is something that had eluded me. And it taught me how to overcome my own fears for my own life, brought me writing, brought me so many things.
Well, boxing humbles us.
Yeah.
Boxing takes us to places that we don't think we can be. It challenges us when we're up and down, and it's you, and you have to find yourself. Yep. I often tell fighters, I'm like, look, you're the artist. The bag, the ring is your canvas. You have to create yourself. Mm-hmm. I can see the vision. I can see what maybe you should be or what I feel you should be, but at the end of the day, you have to be the person in there creating it. What was it like in Gleason's at that time? Were you welcomed into the sport? I mean, because, look, we'll get into it. Women's boxing has evolved 360 to today, from years ago, from when, we're a little older, we've been in gyms, and we've seen the sport at a different time. So what was it like in Gleason's? Were you intimidated at first?
Oh, I was very intimidated to cross that threshold. It was down in Dumbo, Brooklyn, which right now is a very posh little place to be, but at that time was still very industrial. So, and I lived in Brooklyn, so it wasn't that far from where I lived. And climbing up those stairs.
Yeah, you had to and for people who don't know, you got to make that climb.
You got to make that climb.
You got to make that climb up the stairs into Gleason's. You don't see it from the street. You walk in.
You walked up a flight of stairs. There was a steel door.
Yeah.
It was winter. I opened the door, came in, crossed the threshold, and there was a little desk right in the front. And I see the desk. I see a man behind it. I see a chess set to the side. I was like, oh, I get it. And I walked in, and immediately the owner of the gym was
Bruce.
Bruce Silverglade was sitting behind the desk. He said, hi, who are you? Da, 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 da. And I was home. Yeah. I was immediately home. And he walked me around the gym, introduced me to some trainers, and I ended up training with a guy, Johnny Greenidge, who had some champions back in the day. And he was kind of on the back end of that. And very crazy, very old school, wouldn't even use pads,
Yeah.
But I would come in very dedicatedly 3 mornings a week, eventually getting off the wall bag where you first learn to throw your punches. Then did slip rope and heavy bag and sparring, because that's really how you learn how to fight. And realized that this was for me, but it was also a battle for me. You talked just now about how the fighter has to come to themselves on that bag, and and that's what happened to me. As I learned how to release my own power, I would just weep. Tears would stream down my face as I'm hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting, trying to perfect my punches. But it was, for me, this cathartic experience of understanding that I could exert my own personal power. So that's when I realized that I didn't need to compete. I didn't need to do anything like that. This was about opening up my own scars and working through all the things that had ever blocked me in my life.
Yeah.
And this was this was going to be my relationship to the bag, my relationship to what boxing was going to be about, my relationship to how to perfect a jab, how to throw it 1,000 times 1,000 times 1,000 so that maybe I get one jab that feels right, it lands. Maybe 1 out of 2 weeks worth of jabs really feels like I got it. I'm in that space. And that's what boxing was about for me and remains in terms of my personal relationship to the sport. You ask about women in the gym. When I started to box, there were women like Dee Hamaguchi, who was the first woman to open up the Golden Gloves in New York City. There was Jill the Zion Lion. She was training out of Gleason's gym in those days. Alicia Ashley was training out of Gleason's. I got to know Belinda Laraquente, who fought Christy Martin in the early aughts. If you look
It's
at
the early
yeah.
days of women's boxing,
Yeah.
you know, where it's not where it is today. In New York Golden Gloves, there weren't many women at that time.
There were none
Yeah.
until 95. Dee Hamaguchi, who is actually started life as an architect in Canada, did black belt in karate, came to New York and started to box, and wanted to join the Golden Gloves. So she submitted an application, and when she did, she just put her initial D and Hamaguchi. So she shows up for the first fight, and they're like, "Who are you?" They're like, "I'm Dee Hamaguchi."
Yeah.
They're like, "You can't fight." Yes, I can. It's legal for women to fight in the amateurs. They said nope, and so she sued, and that was in '94, and in '95,
The doors open.
the doors open. So I walked into the gym 3 years later, 2 years later, 97. So this was still really new. And there were a lot of women that were training out of Gleason's that were able to compete in the Golden Gloves. So that was a very exciting time. There was that gym, there was Cops and Kids, Starlet City. So there were a bunch of gyms that were opening up to women, but I would say that Gleason's was certainly the largest gym. This was a cavernous place.
Listen, the dynamics over there also,
And the most open.
Look, Brooklyn, right over the bridge from Manhattan, so accessible for people to come in and out of that gym. And obviously the reputation that Bruce Silverglade built there is just, as it stands today on its own. One of the most, probably the famous gym in boxing history out there, I would say.
Yeah.
I'd put it up there.
Certainly, in New York, it's the oldest existing gym extant that has been in continuous operation. It was started in 1937 by an Irish guy. And then they moved down to, started out in the Bronx, then moved down to near Madison Square Garden on 30th Street, and then it got to be way too expensive and ended up in Brooklyn in this industrial neighborhood that grew up around them. So anyway, as I said, I really, I would do crunches sitting next to Melissa Hernandez when she was first fighting in the Golden Gloves and becoming a champion.
I mean, we talked about this previously outside, and you don't know who you're next to in the boxing gym. You could be next to a pro fighter, a successful business person, actors, actresses, everyday people. Absolutely. We all mix in.
Well, that's it, and you're all there, and you're a fighter. And when the first time somebody gives you a fist pump and says, "Hey, champ," your face lights up. When you meet, my face lights up.
No, listen, it's even today, like you see it. I see it with the young kids. If we get a fighter who's a pro come in, they're around the young kids, and you can see the young kids' faces light up when they
Absolutely.
I always like to have guys, especially any of the professionals, put the young kids up with them. Shadow box with them, move with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Nobody's going to say nothing.
No, and it just inspires. But there's also a community of the gym.
Yeah.
That's a very special
It's a
place.
different dynamic. People like I asked you, were you intimidated? I think once you get past the fact, okay, and you're in the boxing gym, the dynamic is family.
Yeah,
If you're
absolutely.
taken in and, you're in there doing your work, you gain respect just from being there by working hard and doing your thing. It's kind of like people see what's going on. Okay, yeah, she's in here every day, man. Oh, okay. She's putting it in, or she's sparring, or she's training with so-and-so. And, that respect kind of comes. You build that respect with everybody, and it is a small community.
Yeah, it becomes a very small community, and it's a very supportive one. And, I've been going there almost 30 years now, which is kind of
wow.
crazy.
Yeah.
When you think about it. And my husband was a white-collar boxer. And he came out of karate.
Yeah, so he fought on the shows there
So
for Bruce.
he fought on a few of the shows for Bruce, and independent of me. I mean, we met later in life,
Right.
late in life, and now he has health issues. He has dementia, and so he can't get to the gym anymore. But
Right.
People will come up to me and say, "Hey, how's my bro? How's he doing?" And that love for him and for me makes my world.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes my world.
We go back. Fighters, it's a misunderstood sport from the outside. From 10,000 feet, people don't understand the sport. They don't understand the people. They think it's a medieval type, two people in there beating the hell out of each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than that. The fight is the fight, okay? But the build up for what fighters go through, whether they're professional, amateur, people in their training, everybody has a reason, and something is brought out of you. You find yourself somehow.
Yeah, and you don't know what it is that you're going to find. I mean, that was my experience coming into the gym as a 42-year-old woman, and what I have still coming out of that gym, coming out of that experience, has changed my life in ways that still reverberate. Or bringing my daughter in that gym. I had my daughter when I was 45 and was pregnant. Used to train while I was pregnant, and then after she was born, we'd come in there and she'd sit on Hector Rojas' lap playing with his bling, while we train. He was the babysitter.
It's a funny story about that. You talk about your daughter. I have a picture with my daughter and Hector Roca. We were in Gleason's before one of David Lemieux's fights.
Oh, cool.
It was Lemieux-Golovkin fight.
Oh, wow. That
So
was a good
we
fight.
had stopped at Gleason's early in the day.
Yeah.
My daughter came to the fight. I had friends from Montreal who knew David that were down. And my friend, they had an association with Hector. I met Hector, but he wouldn't have remembered me from Adam at that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And my daughter, we were there, and he paid more attention talking to her. She was 15 at the time, Brianna, and it was paid. And I have that picture, and I'm like, you don't realize how good of a trainer the man you're standing next to is. And she always kids me now about that picture, and I'm like, rest in peace, Hector Roca.
Absolutely.
Great individual, great New York trainer, icon in the sport.
Absolutely an icon. But, so he knew her as an infant, and literally till 2 weeks, I think it was about a month before he passed away.
Right.
And he had gone in the hospital. I had seen him in the morning, and he always would see me, and he'd say, "How's the old lady?" About my daughter.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that, to your point, Jim is family, and certainly my passion for the sport has sort of evolved into that sense of it's being family. So for me, writing, when I kind of evolved as a writer and as a historian and as my teasing my academic interests, and I came to begin to write about boxing, starting with my own blog in 2010 called Girl Boxing, and then evolving into getting a master's degree and in liberal studies and doing a thesis on women's boxing, and then being given the opportunity to write a history of the sport. I feel everything I write because I understand what a boxer's heart is about.
You were a part of it and you've seen it and this. So you're here now and you get to the point where you're in school and you're going to put this thesis together. How was your thesis taken by your professor at that point? I mean, I kind of like, people doing thesis on different things, and you're in unknown territory at this point.
I was totally
like, what are you writing on?
What's interesting is that my interest was always, I love to travel. I've traveled in my life. I've lived overseas. And one of the things I was always fascinated by was the collision of culture, where things clash. Yeah. I describe crossing the border from Thailand to Malaysia by foot because I had taken a bus to the border in Thailand and then crossed over by foot and then was going to catch a train at that border town to go to Kuala Lumpur. And it absolutely blew my mind because it's literally the same land, right? It's one big isthmus. Right. So and you're at a border crossing and everything's the same in terms of the foliage. Right. But you go from Thailand, where it's the only country I've ever been in my life where I could actually see over a crowd, and I'm 5'4" when I stand tall, and I could see over a crowd, and I was like, wow, this is what it is to be 6 feet tall. Yeah. I come to Malaysia, where the physiognomy of the people are much bigger, much thicker, taller. I can't see over a crowd. But more to the point, it's a Muslim country in the middle of Asia. So I see a stele with Arabic writing on it. And I was like, wow, that's more familiar to me, actually, than Buddhism in Thailand. So it was very interesting to me that you have these two very, very, very different cultures that are just on the same piece of land. And so I became fascinated with that. And I thought that was what I was teasing out when I went to get my master's degree. And my intention was to write a thesis about the tension of culture and use the example of the Greeks and the Turks on the same bit of land in Asia Minor. And I had done all this preparatory work for that, wrote papers, all this stuff. And one of the classes that I had engineered for myself was also to look at collisions, if you will, from the standpoint of the interpersonal. And I was interested in things like purity. What are the things that we think about when we think of purity? Why are some things taboo? What is taboo in personal space? Mm. And I wrote a paper about boxing to kind of describe the idea of boxing as sort of this postmodern religious experience. And we become very intimate with fighters, much more intimate than we ever are in our ordinary life.
So back to your point of purity in the sport of boxing.
Right. So it becomes, we overcome our taboos for things like blood by watching boxing. Not even as participants, but just watching a boxing match, we overcome our own aversion to things like blood, to touching blood, to all of those kinds of things. Or taboos about violence, aggression. We overcome all of those things. So I write this really great paper, and it's like, oh, everybody loves it. And then I was like, but wait a minute, what about women? I'm boxing in a gym. I work out all the time in a gym, and I'm writing about boxing, and people hate women in the sport. So how do I account for that? And so I completely changed everything around and said, okay, no, what I'm going to write about is the gender binary as the collision. There's maleness, femaleness, and this sense of prescribed roles. And then you have boxing that crosses back and forth.
Yes.
Because it's a hyper-masculine sport, but there are moments in time when it's like it's totally acceptable for women to box. So that's what I teased out in this thesis. And in terms of how my professors felt about it, they're like, what? Yeah. But they went on the journey with me because I made a good case. And I had done all this so much work just on the notion of how you manage these collisions of culture. And in essence, it's what it's all about, whether it's the collision of genders, the collision in which we see played out every day in our current society, or a collision of cultures. It's very much a similar
Yeah,
concept.
we see that, and look, the dynamic in women's sports is changing right now.
Right.
Well, it has been, year by year.
Yep.
Women athletics is just, whereas years ago it was frowned upon for a woman to be athletic or play a certain sport.
Absolutely.
We see women's basketball, women's boxing, women's lacrosse, which, I have a daughter that excelled in that. And you look at some of these athletes today, they're phenomenal.
They're phenomenal. And yet they have women like Babe Didrikson as sort of their guardian angels, their godmothers of sport. I mean, here she was. She just had, some people just have physically gifted.
One percenters.
And
The one percenters, and that's what we talk. God taps you and you're a 1%.
And Babe Didrikson was one of them. And for folks who may not have ever heard of her, please look her up.
Mm-hmm.
She started out. She was on a local baseball team, like a company baseball team, and was a phenomenal athlete on the team. And there was some games happening at the same locale where there were Olympic trials for the track and field events. And she was encouraged to just, go run. Well, she goes and runs and wins everything.
Yeah.
And ends up on the 1932 Olympic team for the United States and is entered into all these races and winning them. And then the Olympic officials are going, oh, no. You can only be in 3 races because if you're in more, you might die. It's like,
yeah.
Okay. She wins gold and comes back and then becomes this phenom in popular culture and ends up on the vaudeville stage doing theater, going from theater to theater on the circuit with other athletes, showing off that I'm an athlete and I won a gold medal, and ends up in a boxing gym.
I didn't know that about.
She could do a speed bag. She was doing boxing. I mean, in the early 1930s, and then eventually, found her way to golf. And at that time, there was just the PGA. So she was golfing with the PGA and winning. And they're like, oh, no.
Yeah, we're going to change the rules here.
So that's when the ladies' PGA was started. So for Babe Didrikson to become a golfer, basically.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point of all of that is that there were always phenomenal women who were athletes at different stages, really starting in the 1720s, where women began to box in what we think of as modern prize fighting at the same time men did.
Mm.
In London, under the aegis of James Figg, who basically created modern prize fighting. It had started out, prize fighting actually used to be with small cudgels, and then they started to use a fist as well, and then they dropped the cudgels and just started to do fisticuffs for prize fighting, and they would hold on to gold coins, and if you dropped it, you were done. And women were boxing in the 1720s, and we know this because we see the same kind of advertisements that would be run in the paper, where 2 fighters would call each other out.
Yeah, local establishments or pubs or whatever, athletic clubs
the
at
athletic
the time.
clubs of the day were these little arenas. They would have things like, they were still having dog fights, bear baiting.
Right.
These were all popular entertainments. And men's and women's boxing. They also had tag team boxing. They would have a male and female, like a pair would fight each other. I mean, it was quite a thing. In the United States, we then see really women boxing in the 70s, beginning in the 1870s, late 1870s. There was a guy named Harry Hill, who was a British sporting guy, had boxed, came to the United States in the 1840s and started this bar. and had the idea of having, and he used to have men sort of do like club boxing in the back of his bar, like on the stage. Variety theater, I think it was called. Anyway, he had this idea of having 2 women do it. Publicized the heck out of it. It was in the New York Times, the New York Herald. It was. I actually found the same story repeated and published in the UK, in Australia. I mean, it was a really big deal. So it was well reported, and he had a lot of support from it, and said, okay. He started to have it on a nightly. He would have a women's bout every night. So he began to develop this whole cadre of women who would come in and learn to box and would box on his shows. And then those women went on variety theater circuits and were doing the same kind of shows in St. Louis and Chicago, all the way as far as San Francisco. And it became so popular that women started to have their own boxing little clubs, and they would be...
Yeah, they're getting a following now.
And there were boxing, there were people who would give boxing lessons. There was even a guy who invented a pneumatic boxing gloves so that when women sparred, they wouldn't be hurt because they were pumped up with air. Mm-hmm. And this was from like the 1880s, really, till the early 1900s. And in fact, women even had an exhibition of boxing in 1904 at the St. Louis Exposition, at the same time that the men were doing their exhibition as part of the Olympics in 1904. Men's boxing stayed and became a sport in 1908, and women had to wait another 108 years, and in 2012 finally became the last sport to have men and women compete. So, very interesting.
Yeah. The evolution is just...
The evolution of just sports. I mean, it was at one time illegal for women to run.
Yeah, but, you go back to the same thing, right? Like, okay, boxing. And look at the WNBA today, the popularity of these girls. Caitlin Clark, the college game. It's just the athleticism that you see, the dedication is just... And it's been there.
It's always been there.
It's been there.
It's been there. Soccer, women's soccer.
Women's soccer. Oh. I mean, now we're starting to see women's hockey.
Yep.
I think, and even more so, being a baseball guy, you're starting to see more women in baseball. Yep. And not just as general managers, as field coaches, as hitting coaches. There are women coaches in men's colleges out there now. Even in football, you're starting to see the transition of, look, for me as a coach, I kind of look at it this way. You're building a team. You want the best people. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter. I want the best person that's a fit for our team. It doesn't matter, race, color, creed, whatever. It doesn't matter. No. Gender. If you know what you know, and you're good at it, let's bring it. You know what I mean? If you're gonna make our team better, let's bring it. But, we know, and more so now, women's boxing has had a tough journey.
It has.
Even, and, your thesis to this book, a lot of research. And, look, you're in the hub. You're in the New York area, so you're seeing fighters. You're not in, no disrespect, in the middle of Oklahoma where there might be 5 female. You're seeing the local women that are in the sport. Then you're seeing any of the professional women coming through the sport who might be fighting here. And for people who don't know, women's boxing, not only in the United States and across the country right now, but in the tri-state area is huge right now. I think there are more women in the gym right now as amateurs, aspiring maybe to be pros. There's different avenues. Not only in boxing, you have bare knuckle, you have MMA, kickboxing, karate. We have a lot of combat sports now that women are getting involved in, and they're being very, very successful. What, as you're into this now, you write the thesis now, come back out. How did it come for you to put this down on paper now? What was your, like, okay, I did all my research, I put a thesis together. Now, I'm not done. I need something else. And how does this come about?
Yeah, so
Melissa.
So I wrote the first book, A History of Women's Boxing.
I mean, this is the only one out there.
This is my second book.
This is the second book, but the first one
is
remains the Bible.
It's the Bible. It was coined. Thank you. Tom Gerbasi who wrote for The Ring said this is the Bible of women's boxing, and it remains the only history of the sport. And I feel lonely as an author of women's boxing books.
Do you feel lonely, or do you feel like a pioneer?
I am a pioneer, and I really want people to follow me because the pressure to get it right is so hard. There are maybe 50 boxing books a year that are published.
Yeah.
And
Look.
Easy.
Look, you know what? You have the fight of the year. You sell 1 million copies, right? It doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
You have the knockout of the year or do something extraordinary, and your copies are going off the shelf. So now, during the research for this, right, here you are. Was most of your research done at Gleason's, or were you traveling for this?
No, for this book, basically, I
Either
did
one. Let's go back to the first one.
Well, for the first one, it was mostly historic.
Okay.
So I covered 300 years of the sport.
So you went back.
Literally.
You went back.
I went back. I did, thankfully, a lot of print journalism has been digitized and was digitized by 2014.
Right.
I was literally able to read newspaper articles published in 1720.
So you were able to go to the library.
So I was
pull
able
that
to go to the
stuff.
library, be online, pull all of that information, and then from there tease out. I did things like go to census records.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I combed and searched for information about the early years of boxing. And I mean in the 18th century, in the 19th century, the early 20th century, where there's very little out there, and yet I would tease and pull and find, and I placed it within the context of what was going on in the world at that time. What did people think of women at that time? Were they allowed to do anything? I mean, for instance, in the 1890s, the bicycle became this incredible sort of revolution for women because they could get on a bicycle and go.
Yeah.
And it was really the development of the safety chain. And if you look at the way women dressed in the 1880s to the 1890s, in the 1880s, they still had big bustles on their butt, and even poor women had these elaborate clothing to wear. By the 1890s, when they're riding bicycles, slim skirts, slim blouses, they could hitch them up so they could ride a bicycle.
Right.
I mean,
it becomes adaptable.
It becomes adaptable. So I placed the sport of boxing and its opportunity for women to either participate as boxers, participate as audience members, or have other roles in the sport. For instance, by 1916, there were 2 different women in 2 different parts of the country who were managing their brothers' careers. And how do you learn this? Because it's in the newspaper. Articles are written about them, about what they were doing for their brothers, how they were pioneering as managers who were female and getting fights for their brothers and helping train them and finding promoters. So those are the things that I really teased in the first book. The second book, the premise of this is, okay, so women finally get into the Olympics in 2012. What happened after that? There's been this explosion of yet another era in the sport. But what has it really meant for the fighters? And there are really kind of 2 tiers of fighters. You have elite fighters who came out of the Olympics. I call them the Olympians, or very closely associated with it. They've had one trajectory where they have been treated in a lot of ways like their male counterparts, meaning they get paid for their training. They can go to camp. They have a camp. They can go somewhere to...
Well, they found a way that they could be marketed where finance can come into play.
Finance can come into play, and it's not requiring them to work full-time.
Right.
They are full-time employed as boxers. Through their contracts, through that opportunity, versus 95% of the other women in boxing who, even though they may have come out of the amateurs, have not had that very rarefied elite pedigree. So they're continuing on having to work full-time jobs, selling out tickets, but
Right.
still pushing to get on fight cards, to get TV time. Because, in the United States, we had women routinely on cards till about 2007. Then it died on the vine. And you didn't see women on television again, except for a few Spanish language television shows, which nobody really watches other than, not to denigrate it at all, but it's not part of the mainstream boxing
Right.
per se. Until Amanda Serrano showed up on a CBS afternoon fight card in 2015. And then it took another year before Heather Hardy and Shalito Vincent showed up on NBC streaming on an Errol Spence card.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about Shelly Vincent, and shout out to Shelly.
Yeah.
She's had some of her amateur fighters fight on our card, and shout out to Heather Hardy. Those two ladies were fighting prior to being on TV. That was the cherry for them to be on a mainstream.
Exactly.
Heather fighting on, a lot of local shows for DeBella Entertainment, and Shelly fighting for CES for Jimmy Birchfield and my buddy up there. Shout out to him.
Yep.
What you're saying, not only for women, okay, but boxing is, a certain percentage of people are going to have that financial opportunity where they can box, right? Most fighters, as we know, are out there, and I say this honestly, right? We'll assimilate it to baseball, right?
Yeah.
You get somebody, and it's hard today because baseball has changed, but you're a 20-game winner in baseball as a pitcher. Teams are, here you go, Melissa.
Yep.
You have 1 year, right? Think about this, right? There are fighters out there that are 20-0, not making a full-time living in boxing.
Yep.
Or can't cash a big check.
Nope.
What they have to do to become 20-0, people don't realize what's entailed in that, the hardship, the ups, the downs, and everything else. And I get it with women, too, that are fighting it through. But now the women are having more trouble because they're putting in the effort. And a lot of these women, we know, are sparring with men. Yep. Okay, because there might not be a pool of weight class in their area, coaches or whatever. So, they're forced to spar with men and to get better. They're putting in the same amount of time. Like, you go to these gyms and, Gleason's, these women that are fighting at a high amateur level or coming into the amateurs or into pro level are putting time in. They're not once a week, a couple hours a day. They're in there every day eating diets, some of them, our friend Maureen Shea told the story about her, eating out of the back of her car, putting meals together while going to school on a budget and trying to keep everything while she was training and fighting at the same time. Yep. And we know stories like that.
Listen, Alicia Ashley, she fought for her first WBC belt in the I think it was the Hunts Point Market on a Joe DeGuardia card for $3,000. She then is able to find in Mexico and earn a real living, earn a real paycheck. She would get $20,000 or $30,000 for a fight, and that was a lot of money for a woman, and be a headliner, in Mexico. But in New York, she'd earn $3,000 for the same fight.
Yeah,
same caliber of fight. So there are real issues and real discrepancies, and it's not to say that the boys don't also. They do.
There's.
But for women, it's that much harder because they can't necessarily get on cards, or they're promised something and then it never comes through, or they're having to sell out an enormous number of tickets.
Yeah.
And then be promised a placement on a fight card. This happens.
Yeah, well, that's a win-win for the promoter.
And never get it.
Yeah, you never get it. But let me throw this at you for a second, in all your research and everything else, and let's take a step back for a second to, Christy Martin, Layla Ali.
Right.
Okay, you would think, Christy fighting on HBO for Don King.
Well, Showtime, yeah.
You showed,
but she
well,
never
not
won on
HBO. I
HBO.
mean, showed, but mainstream on a main card for Don King.
Pay-per-view.
Pay-per-view. And, Layla Ali obviously being who she was, both very, very good talent in the women game.
Yep.
What do you think why wasn't the door opened with those two at that point? Because they broke the barrier. These are two women, good-looking women, could fight, had skills. Both of them had different sets of skills and, were the one percenters at that time. Why don't you think it opened at that point?
It did for a while. I mean, look,
Yeah.
when Christy Martin came to notoriety, it's like, oh, women box, wow. This is,
Right.
on the Frank Bruno, Mike
Mike
Tyson,
Tyson card,
card
yeah.
with Deidre Gargany in '96. Christy Martin ends up on cover of Sports Illustrated.
Right.
And, Don King is like, oh, my God,
Yeah.
he's a genius.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
discovered women that can box. Bob Arum gets in. He gets Lucia Riker, who, talk about one percenter in terms of natural athlete. She was an extraordinary.
She was an unbelievable fighter.
She was an unbelievable fighter. She had been a kickboxer in Europe.
Yes.
Was inspired by Christy, that 1996 bout, came to America, ends up training with Freddie Roach, first woman he ever trained. And she was a phenomenal.
And I've seen some of that early footage of her training with Freddie.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, if they don't know Lucille Riker, they'll know her from the movie $1 Million Baby.
Yeah, they know her from
She
there,
plays
yeah.
a villain, unfortunately.
Blue
but
Bear.
and in reality, she was a very, very elite fighter.
Very elite fighter, and there's a documentary called Shadowlands. I think it's Shadowlands. Sorry. Anyway, try to find it. You can actually get it on YouTube, and it really traces a lot of her early career. She, again, phenomenal fighter. Bob Arum dropped her and picked up Mia St. John.
Because Mia St. John was able to sell to the public.
Well, and she was a very
appearance-wise.
She had she was a very beautiful
Yes.
woman, and very overtly sexualized herself. She was on the cover of Playboy magazine with
Right.
2 red boxing gloves. So that was around the same time that Layla Ali was fighting. But then it wasn't only Layla Ali who got into the game. You had, I don't know, the boxing daughters. There were a whole bunch of them, most of whom were terrible.
Yeah, Layla could fight. I
Layla
mean, like,
could
you
fight.
watch her.
Jackie Fraser Lai
Yeah.
could fight. They put on a great show. For those who don't know, they had the first female pay-per-view at the top of the card, and they fought up on the Hall of Fame weekend. So it was a very big deal, and it was a decent fight, surprisingly decent fight.
Well, you're right in front of your peers. You're right in front of the community
and
to validate you.
and accepted, and
Right.
you again, you can see that fight on YouTube. It's worth watching. It was very early in Layla Ali's career. She really did work very, very hard to become an elite fighter. She was a little less than elite at that time because it was early in her career.
She had a tough name to overcome.
But
she that
did.
she had the name to overcome. But for people who haven't seen her fight, she could fight.
She could fight, and she became better and better and better.
Yes, she was
her
a thinker.
Boxing IQ just increased each fight. The thing with Layla Ali is that because of who her dad was, she immediately had name recognition, but she earned it. She did earn it, and she earned to become Layla Ali, not just Muhammad's daughter.
No, she didn't. She earned her name. She had skill, great ring IQ.
Great ring IQ, and became a crossover figure. So even today, if you say women's box, if you walk up to anybody on the street and talk about, well, women's boxing, they'll say, wasn't there that Layla Ali? She's
Right.
still the name.
She still puts it out there.
She still puts it out there, but she still is the name that most people, even now, associate with women in boxing. They'll say, yeah, that Layla Ali. So she was fighting, and there was this mad scramble to get women on fight cards. And there were some great fighters. There's Samia Ananya, sorry, massacring, completely destroying names. Kathy Collins. I mean, there were some really excellent fighters who were coming up at that time. Ann Wolfe.
Oh, Ann Wolfe. It's my God.
She was a phenomenal fighter. But
and not only, I'll tell you what, just not to cut you off about Ann Wolfe, great coach.
Oh, brilliant coach.
I mean, you know, people, you know, you talk about the sport, and I haven't met her. I've heard interviews, I've watched her, and I've seen her, you know, what she did with Kirkland, changed his career around, and what he did at the end with her is just whatever. But, you know, Ann Wolfe was a beast. She trained as hard as most athletes out there today, if not harder.
So much to prove.
Yeah, so much to prove.
So much to prove.
But took her knowledge not only as a fighter, but brought it into the coaching world.
Brought it into the coaching world, and really a truly phenomenal fighter, and humble, and just sort of very much in her place. Single mom. I mean, had her issues, had a lot to overcome, as we all do.
We do. That's the fight game.
That's the fight game. And so there were great boxers, but there were also kind of what people would call the freak show, the boxing daughters that didn't belong in the ring. There were a lot of people that didn't belong in the ring because they really didn't have any other.
Yeah, promoters trying to sell tickets, put it out there.
Tickets, and when Christy Martin's, you know, look, you have a lifetime as a boxer, and by 2006, Christy Martin was on the other end of it. Layla Ali was looking to retire. She left the sport. And even though there were great boxers, there was Layla McCarter, Melissa Hernandez. They were really peak fighters, but they did not grab the imagination, and they were not grabbing the opportunity for promotion in the United States. Layla McCarter had her perch in Las Vegas, but it didn't expand beyond that universe particularly.
Yeah.
Melissa Hernandez was a road warrior. She's fighting in Canada. She's fighting in South America, winning WC belts. I mean, these are serious female fighters. But by that point, the bottom fell out, and they're not on television. If you don't see it, it's not there.
Yeah.
And that's basically, you have like 10 years of phenomenal boxing that never showed up on anyone's.
Well, the game is changing at that point, okay? Yep. So we're losing pay-per-views, we're losing HBO and Showtime at this time, and ESPN, or these local venues where fighters can be, you know, showcased out there, and like you said, out of sight, out of mind. Absolutely. Okay? And, you know, now, back to you doing this, what's the response you're getting as you're interviewing? You're in gyms, you're talking to women, you're talking to trainers, you're talking to promoters. I know you've been all through the New York area, and then some. What's the response to you?
The response is, thank you for doing this.
From the fighters.
From the fighters, from the promoters. Thank you for doing the work, because it's not out there. How do we ensure that this doesn't get lost, like those lost 10 years of all these great fighters out there, all these tremendous opportunities, tremendous fights that are lost, except for finding them maybe on YouTube, that were never seen by the public. Well, and how do we ensure and enshrine these athletes?
But do you think?
Their place.
Look, you've been in gyms now. You see the sport, okay?
Yeah.
You see it where the bottom fell out 10 years. Where we are today with social media and everything being out there, if you're anybody, whether a male or female, you're up on social media, the world knows about you in a heartbeat. But the other aspect, getting back to the female end of it, do we see the stereotype stopped? Because we go into gyms today, at least I do, and you're going to see women not only competing, but training for fitness, personal reasons, self-defense. That intimidation is over where, I want to box. I want to learn to box. I want to challenge myself. It's become so. Is that going to drive the sport more? Because
it might drive audience. I mean, one of the things that I feel that the promoters in the United States have really not given any opportunity to even consider is that, when you watch women box in a local venue, like a Broadway boxing show or a CES show, in Rhode Island or shows out in East LA, the fans are rabid. They love to support their people. We talked about Heather Hardy and Shelley Vincent, their first fight, which was for a WBC silver belt. Shelley had bus loads of people.
yeah,
Literally buses came to that fight in Coney Island, right? Heather Hardy sold out the other side. I mean, Errol Spence, there might be one person there to see Errol Spence. Everybody was there for them.
right.
So if promoters capture that magic in a bottle and realize, wow, all these people are coming out to support these fighters, or if Sonia Lamonicas is a New York area fighter, heavyweight, you always knew when she was on a card in Connecticut because there were one whole section of screaming fans that came out
to see her
down from Massachusetts to see her.
And I got to tell you about, hey, Sonia, I got my book, so don't break my chops next time I come down to Gleason's. All right, I love you, and she's a New York icon also. As far as not only as a fighter, she is
what she's done for amateur sports.
What she's done for amateur boxing in New York, in New York City. She's a true cares, wants the best for the kids, the coaches, and everything. And you know what? Shout out to you, Sonia. I've had the pleasure to work some events with you, and you're definitely someone out there in the sport that I know people don't give you enough accolades out there, but I'm going to give you one here. So, but yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying because look, this is okay. The promoters want to promote so they can make their money. The fighters, we want to make fights that make sense, and we want to make fights that are exciting. Right. Not just, there's two fans of boxing, right? There's people like us who are the hardcore boxing fans, right? We know the sport, right? We can go to. Then you don't have to sell the hardcore fan because the hardcore fan's going to know about the fight. Oh, Shelley's fighting Heather, or Amanda's fighting Katie, or whatever. We need to sell it to the public.
It's the public, and it's the public, and how you go to these fights. It's electric, it's lightning in a bottle. So how do you translate that? How do you get somebody to say, "Hey, look, we just filled out a stadium here with really excited." How do we create that excitement over the airways or through streaming or some other way? How do we take that chance? How do we translate those excited fans? They're not hardcore. They like to follow it. There's something about that particular fighter that they're a fan of. How do you translate that? How do you convince a promoter, hey, listen, it's worth it to keep that one fight that's a female fight. The most it's going to cost you is 20 minutes, right? 10-by-2 if it's a title fight. That's if they go the distance. Yeah. That's the most it's going to cost you. Most of the time, it's maybe a 6-rounder. You're talking 12 minutes. At the most, you got the ring walk in and out. It's really only the in.
Yeah.
So what is it going to cost you? 16 minutes of airtime? Come on, give them a break.
Yeah, but all that and any of the sponsors. So do you think we hit that road? We've seen some great women fights, okay? Katie Taylor and Serrano selling it out.
Oh, my God.
And we talked about this before. Unbelievable fight. Unbelievable fight.
Yep.
Okay, here in the States. Take Katie again, bringing her back over her last 2 fights.
In Ireland.
Yeah. In Ireland. I mean, you're putting 80,000 people in the stands.
Yep.
You're putting 80,000 people, and don't get this twisted. Don't get it wrong. I'm not trying to disrespect or say anything to anybody else. for women's boxing mainstay, the talent is there now to sell it.
Talent is huge.
The talent is there.
Absolutely.
Okay, you're going to see two talented fighters. Swing it back 10 years ago, 15 years ago when you start this project and you start thinking about this, would you have foreseen what we have seen?
No, I did not. I did not foresee selling out the Garden in 2022.
And look, for people who didn't see that fight, okay? And I'm talking about the hardcore boxing people saw that fight, know about that fight. If you're a boxing fan, you need to YouTube that fight. Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano in the Garden, one of the most exciting fights I've seen in a long time, as far as
just
that
pure boxing.
Okay. And I kind of lost my track here for a second. You said you wouldn't have guessed that you would see something like that.
I wanted it.
You wanted it. My track is now I got it back here. Did you expect, take out that you know both fighters, did you expect to see a fight like that?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to go back to 2011. The AIBA was then the
Right.
the
organization
that ran elite Olympic level boxing, elite international boxing, and the president of AIBA, Dr. Wu, was wanting to put through an edict to have women wear skirts in the ring. This is in 2011. And it's like, what? Are you insane?
Yeah.
And, people like Katie Taylor, who was, sort of the top amateur at the time, were like, I refuse. I will not box if you're going to put me in a skirt. An interviewer, Michael Rivas, who was up in Albany, New York, interviewed Dr. Wu and said, why are you doing this? Because no one apparently had asked him why. And he said, well, this is the problem we have. When we have amateur fights on television, people can't tell if it's girls or boys boxing.
Ooh.
So if we put them in a skirt, then they can tell. I read that as, women have cracked the code of what boxing is. They box. So when they come into an arena to box, when they're in a boxing ring, it's not about gender. It's about
ability, skills, yeah.
Okay?
You're getting the same skill level now.
You have the same skill. So when that happened, when I heard that and saw, of course, the tremendous level of skills that was exhibited in the 2012 Olympics and in the 2016 Olympics and in any kind of elite world caliber amateur fighting, it's like, yes, that fight can happen because women have cracked the code. They have a boxing body. They have a boxing understanding. And I don't mean that necessarily the physiognomy, because everybody's got a different body. But they can execute a jab. They can execute a hook. They can execute an overhand right. And they have the art.
The code is cracked in the sense because trainers are teaching it and they're working with it. We throw all the names out. We can throw Clarissa Shields, Michaela Marr. There's tons of them. I don't want to miss anybody. Katie Taylor, Serrano. I don't want to.
Right.
We can throw a bunch of them out there right now.
Yep.
All right. Those are the ones that are.
Estrada.
Yes, right. These are ones coming to mind right now. And if you watch their training and you watch their preparation for the fight, the repetitiveness of the skill level, yes. Clarissa Shields, she does things that most boxers can't, male or female. She's just gifted, skilled, gifted, talent, stuff that you can't teach.
Nope.
You could polish.
She just has this innate understanding of boxing. It's just,
right.
Again, it's in her mind. It's in her DNA. She's been boxing since she was 11. It's in her DNA.
Yeah. I like that terminology. I use that a lot. It's got to be in your DNA sometimes to be successful. It's there, and it takes a coach. It takes somebody to pull it out of you.
Absolutely.
And to see it and say, okay, where do you see yourself going from this? I mean, you've already put out one, the history, the Bible out there. Now,
And now
we're seeing a different momentum now
we are.
with this. And where do you see yourself? Because you're heavily involved on the back end of the sport, not just writing. You're on committees in New York. You work at the WBC. You're in the rankings. You have input at the Hall of Fame for the women. Where do you see yourself going now with this? Where your contribution could be?
Well, I'm very interested in my role as an advocate for the sport, for fairness, for opportunity, and also linking it to the larger questions about women's sports. I mean, we touched on this and the significant changes in the sport, and the idea of that, athletes, a person who is an athlete, male or female, develops a mindset that not only urges them to greatness in the pursuit of their own excellence in the sport they've chosen, but it's a mindset, it's a discipline.
Right, it's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, exactly. And I'm here to advocate for those opportunities for young girls through womanhood, through 70, and always being open to growth and opportunity and pushing one's own self to always be better, to always have opportunity. And what I want to see for women in the sport is just the chance to do it. Just put them on a card, see what they can achieve. What does it cost you? Women are only fighting 2-minute rounds right now. So you throw a 6-rounder or even an 8-rounder, it costs you nothing. Yeah. Because even, when you have a men's fight that's an 8-rounder, it's 24 minutes versus 16.
Well, listen, they need to fill the card, whether it's 4, 6, or 8.
Exactly.
Or 10.
So
you need to fill X amount of rounds on a card.
It killed me that the Canelo card had 11 fights, and not one of them was a female bout. What? There are so many really talented women out there. And the fact that that card was put out there without a fight, it just really annoyed the crap out of me. I was like, how dare you do that?
And the flip side.
Cost you nothing.
The flip side to that is take out of our area, which we know. Go to the West Coast, LA, Texas, big boxing areas.
Huge.
Big boxing areas. A lot of women boxers, through the state of California, Texas. Just phenomenal amount. Mexico now we're starting to see fighters more out of Argentina, Costa Rica, Yoko Valley, just tearing. She's just another one that's just, okay, great fight, her last fight.
Yep.
Great fight between
Sinisa.
yes, Sinisa, and Yoko Valley's marketing herself in a different way.
But she has opportunity in Costa Rica that Sinisa Estrada never has here. Yoko Valley, she sells out 35,000.
And now she's promoting fighters.
Yeah.
So we have an associate.
Arenas.
We have an associate down there that we have 2 kids that are fighting under her promotion right now.
Oh, that's
down there.
fantastic.
You're right. She sells out weigh-ins, everything else. Also her coach is a female coach.
Yes, female coach from California.
Just another.
Who we actually the ring voted her coach of the year.
Yeah. I mean, so
Gloria,
I
she's
think,
amazing.
yeah, she is. I've seen some. I think the education comes in the sport is, look, in Connecticut, we've been blessed. Our gym, we have some, women fighters come out of there. I've had Stephanie Moss come out of there and, transition from being a softball player to, a fighter and saw great success. And there's been other girls in the state, some national champions.
Right.
Brianna Allers out of New Haven, 18 years old, great.
You also had the first legal bout in 1976 with Gwen Gemini and Lady Tiger Trimier.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, in the state of Connecticut.
Where was that at? You recall? Stanford?
No,
Hartford?
it wasn't in Stanford, wasn't it? It might have been Hartford. It was in Connecticut, and it was sort of like we did what? We legalized boxing.
Yeah, and see, you want to
because
know.
you had a female governor at the
but
time.
you did, but here's the other thing people don't know about Connecticut. Connecticut had blue laws. I mean, if you go back in the state of Connecticut, okay, they passed boxing in '76, but there were places in Connecticut that the women couldn't sit at the bars with the men. They had to sit away from the bar.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, there were different blue laws throughout the state where it affected women.
But anyway, you did have a legal bout with Gwen Gemini and Lady Tiger Trimier.
Thoughts going forward now with.
I'm cautiously I'm optimistic because women are optimistic. You know, we have the Olympics coming up in a month. Our Olympic team this year is kick butt. I mean, they are 4 men, 4 women. They are all champions. They really have shots at bringing home medals. And my hope is we make it a big deal because, you know, we lost the 20 Olympics because of COVID and everything else. So this is a real opportunity to shine in all the sports in the summer 2024 Olympics, and especially for boxing, because this is a really great team and worthy of support. And where they go in the future and the inspiration that they give to young girls who are fighting on cards all across the country, winning JOs, going overseas and fighting in elite women's championships at the JO level and into the elite level. It is still a sport that is becoming. And we have the example of Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano as sort of the apex of opportunity. We have the example of Clarissa Shields or Marlon Esparza or Michaela Mayer. These are all Olympians. But we also have the example of the grit of somebody like a Shelley Vincent who just muscled through. And now she, as a coach, she as somebody that's putting on amateur shows and really dedicating herself to that opportunity, paying it forward. And all of these women paying it forward is where this sport is going to grow. And if, you know, boxing itself is in flux in the United States, as we well know. All of our former outlets are gone. I mean, HBO is gone. Showtime is gone. ESPN is a shadow of itself in terms of what it gave to boxing.
You know, it's going to stream, and it's going. Unfortunately, that's where it's going.
Exactly.
And we can see that. We're going to kind of wrap up here a little bit, Melissa. Tell us a little bit about where we can find your information and where we can find you.
Sure.
All right. Second book, Promise of Women's Boxing. Please take a look at it. Tell us about your first book, too, the name again, and the Bible.
It's called A History of Women's Boxing. The second book, The Promise of Women's Boxing, A Momentous New Era for the Sweet Science. You can find them online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever your preferred online bookseller is where you can find it. If it's on, as I said, Amazon, it's been in the top 5 of new book releases, new boxing book releases since it was released on June 4th. It hit number 1 again a few days ago. So
I'm looking forward to a good read here. Tell us where we can find you.
Sure. So I on social media, I am at Girl Boxing Now. That's on Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook. I also have a website. I have my boxing blog called girlboxing.org and my regular website for me, melissa-smith.com. And again, mostly you can find me at Girl Boxing Now.
Awesome.
I live tweet fights and everything else.
Awesome. I mean, we'd love to have you back up here again. I'd love to have you at the gym. Maybe we can put together a little seminar with the girls, have you come in and talk and give some inspiration. You know, on Coach's Corner, we kind of take a little spin at the end, and we kind of put you on the spot here, okay? We're going to put you on the spot a little bit, and it's a little twist, and we kind of fire a couple questions at you, nothing crazy. First question I always kind of ask everybody is, if you were going to be in a foxhole, who are you picking to be with you?
Oh, my God. That's
you got one person.
You know, I'm going to say my daughter.
Okay.
My daughter.
I like that one. I like that one. Some people struggle with that question and everything else.
Say her.
I'm going to give you 3 dinner guests, dead or alive. People you want to have dinner with and have a conversation with. Who are they?
That is a tough one.
It always is, because people answer it and then they come back and say, I should have thought about this one.
Well, I have a lot of. I'm going to say John Cassavetes,
The actor?
the filmmaker.
Filmmaker.
Director. My first love was film.
Okay.
So John Cassavetes, for sure. He'd be a fascinating guest. He's passed away, but he was quite a character. Dead or alive. Gosh, 3 people. I'm failing at this.
You're overthinking it.
I am. So I'll just stick with film. John Cassavetes, for sure. Werner Herzog, the German director, who was last seen in The Mandalorian.
Okay.
'Cause I'm a comic book girl. Star Wars, Star Trek, And, Bill Shatner. So 3 guys and me. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw one more bullet at you real
Okay.
quick because you kind of opened the door. We'll wind it up. Since you're a film person, best boxing movie for you? A lot of them out there.
A lot of them out there. Probably The Harder They Fall. On the Waterfront.
On the Waterfront, I love as one of People as one of my favorite movies. Of all time.
Probably that one of the 2. If I really think about it, I'll have to say On the Waterfront.
Great movie, Marlon
great
Brando,
movie.
Rod Steiger.
Just so many of the issues of failing. It's all about how we fail each other, and yet find redemption in love. But it's a beautiful film, and I would have to say that.
Awesome. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time out and coming up here. Keep up the great work. We'd love to have you back up, really, and we'll be looking for you and communicating a little bit about what's going on in the world of women's boxing. Okay. We want to thank a couple of our sponsors. Nirvana Super Water, my guy Roger Snelling, thank you for providing us water for our fighters and everybody there. My guys over here, Ian and Matt at Creative Evolution, couldn't do it without them. And we'll catch you guys again on Coach's Corner. Have a great night.